galactic purr of KKs
invites you to Space Cats Happy Hour.
Let your mind relax. We meet in a dimension outside of time,
Where the playfully curious thrive.
So go on, fill your tin cup chalice with the sacred elixir of creativity. Laugh till you breathe violet flame at the theme's absurdity.
and above all, let out your full-throated song with us.
Here at Space Cats Happy Hour, with the galactic purr of KKs.
Hello and welcome to Space Cats Happy Hour. Today we're unicorns.
In
and
outer
we have-
space.
In outer space. We've got all the filters going.
Oh man, bringing in that hilarity all off the bat. Great start to the day.
I am juiced up. It's very sunny and it's a very sunny day to talk about death a whole
Yes.
lot. This is going to be our second attempt at recording ourselves talking about our awakenings, both of which held a lot of death energy. So yeah, and then we were maybe going to start off talking about this course that we're both taking online about dreaming, lucid dreaming, and like doing journeys, which you do like in a awake meditative state to go back into your dreams or to get more information from your dreams. All of that. That's this online course with the Shift Network that is taught by Robert Moss, who I think he actually uses the term active dreaming more than lucid dreaming, which is kind of fun.
He does, yeah. It's a nice way of looking at it.
Yeah,
I
and
love this course. It's so cool.
It is cool and like very fruitful. Like he'll guide you through a journey or several journeys in each course, and I always find them very powerful and like illuminating and really helpful. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always go into the sessions like, okay, I can't really do this. Oh, I'm not in the mood, or whatever. And then once I actually relax into the exercise, I'm like, whoa, I have a lot more in me to come out than I was giving myself credit for. So if I don't know, if you have any of those feelings about lucid dreaming and you can't do it or whatever, it's really worthwhile to take these classes. It's fun.
Yeah, I've had good luck with the Shift Network in general. I've taken a few very, very solid courses that were very activating and stuff. But so in the third class, it was a journey where you interact with trees, which I always love. I always find trees are like have
The
so
best.
much wisdom and information to share. So why don't you start by sharing what came through for you?
Yeah,
Your
this
tree.
was so fun. So you start the exercise off by being high up in your tree, and your tree is, your tree. It's a childhood tree or maybe a fantasy book tree or whatever tree shows up in your mind's eye, that is your tree. And you just get up to the very tippy top. I was sitting up on the branches like a bird, not an actual person, which was an interesting feeling. And you look down and see like the river road that is your life. Just kind of take a look at it. Whatever shows up is what you're meant to see. And my road showed up it was water. So it was a river, but like it was in the shape of a snake, and then it turned into a snake. And then I was riding the back, like right where the neck would meet the head, if it was, not one long thing, but I was riding it just right there, like you would a dragon in your fantasy novels, like, and then I would point off in one direction and the snake would just go, no judgment, just where do you want to go? And I'm like, oh, wow, this is really powerful. Anyway, we end up at the market of lost and found souls. And again, you can just feel this market and smell the air and taste the air. Like you just know you're in the market that you're supposed to be in. And there's a gatekeeper at this market so that you can find your stall, just explore. But there's a gatekeeper here. And so you kind of check out what the gatekeeper is and what it's telling you. My gatekeeper was the genie machine thing from Big, the movie Big. And I just... And right after I saw the genie gatekeeper, I was like, what is this trickster energy? And then I saw Coyote had dropped it in as a symbol, and then Coyote ran off. So I was like, okay, this is definitely a nice, gentle intro to like, this is the kind of mischievous, joyful energy that you can start harnessing for this upcoming year, especially. That's what it felt like to me, just to sort of, trickster energy doesn't have to be cruel and pranky like we were talking about yesterday. And because I've always been afraid of trickster energy. And I know that we keep getting messages about having fun and bringing in joy. And I got apparently past life messages for me are very much in the mischievous energy realm. And I'm not very comfortable with that energy, or at least I thought I wasn't. Anyway, it was a really, really powerful journey into just opening myself up to, I don't know, the kind of joy I want to bring into my life and what's already there inside of me. It was just a really, really nice journey.
I'm just thinking now, another interesting thing about the movie Big for me is that it connects to my current working theory, which is that adulthood is entirely a programming, like a earth programming construct. And we're like, I think we're children and we're elders and we're both.
Yep.
Adulthood, all those like stages are just extremely, I don't want to say artificial because we live them as reality, but like they're just like we impose them on ourselves and we can shed them. And so
that's very powerful. I like
that. And I think the programming of adulthood is, well, it's so interesting because it's like, we know that it's, we know that it's a social construct. We know that people at age 13 used to be considered adults and blah, blah, blah. And there wasn't even a category of like being a teenager and yada, yada, and all that stuff. And there's like, I'm sure so many capitalist things that go into
maybe a little
like what our ideas are around being an adult and stuff. So
that movie is so great. That's definitely another breadcrumb I didn't realize as a movie. It was,
and the music part too, right? He's on a giant keyboard.
that was one of the first images that popped in. Oh, but I didn't actually put that together until you said that. Yep, that's another big music thing. Real-time download, folks. Real-time download.
And snakes, like you were telling me a different journey from that class where a snake was staring at you and you were
that was a dream.
Oh, that was a dream.
Yeah, no, it was a really, and oh my God. And the snake was swimming down a river. It was very actively. And I was oh my God. And I was sitting up high in a tree, or at least observing trees like from their height. So I knew I was up high. Oh, interesting. And then as the snake came down the river, it was definitely looking straight at my face. And I knew it was
that
me.
time you looked at each other, and this time you actually jumped on it.
Riding on it. Oh, wow. That's a really fun nugget right there. Oh, that was cool.
Ride the serpent.
More dirty jokes.
Actually, I'm not sure if my notes even relate to the same way, but they start with a tree. So I guess that's close enough. Because it was the baobab tree, which is not my tree. I think I remember that from the session that like I didn't go to my tree. I just went to a baobab tree and I was like, okay, which I don't know a lot about. So I was up very high. They're those ones that they have these really interesting, like really long cigar shaped trunks. And then the branches are all at the top. And I always thought of them as being in the African continent, but in my thing, I kept seeing kangaroos. And then it turns out there's also an Australian baobab. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I crawled up the trunk to sit up high. So I was also up high in the branches, and there were a lot of kangaroos with babies in their pouches hopping around. Aww. It was like this landscape of just baobabs and kangaroos, very like desert playa-ish. And it felt a bit connected to survival. And I don't know. And anyway, I was looking up baobabs afterwards. They're flame resistant, which is really interesting because like I'm in the process of reconnecting to fire energy, and all my fire fears are, for that reason, were like coming up a lot. One of the messages of the tree was like, trees don't go to others. So it's okay to wait for others to come to you.
Lovely.
For like for my work, I think, like any kind of support and stuff. The kangaroos were balancing on their tails, which they do. Oh yeah, that was interesting. Females only conceive if there's enough vegetation. Their tail acts like a third leg. Waka waka. That's what we all said. The little baby thingies, they call them neonates. They emerge after 33 days, which I thought that number is always good. big number. Yeah. And it's a matriarchal society. I actually found this adorable video afterwards of like this mother kangaroo with her adult daughter and the baby, and they were all just like being silly and playing together. The mother-daughter bonds last a lifetime. Very, very cute.
Wow. I had no idea.
Yeah, and the baobab it's prehistoric species, predates the splitting of continents. It's also often called the tree of life because it can hold so much water in its trunk.
Wow, you are blowing my mind. This is cool.
Yeah. Oh, and they also, right. Trees don't go after others. Others come to them. And also trees don't keep tabs on those who have come to them. Like a bird can come and go as it pleases, get what it needs from the tree, but the tree's not like
counting.
Yeah. Where's the bird? Which I think was, again, like good stuff for me with my work of just letting it go. But
go.
yes. So that was my tree vision.
That is beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, it was interesting. And I still haven't fully unpacked all aspects of it, I think, with the kangaroos and the trees and the landscape.
I was trying to, because I know you've had visions with Uluru in it before, right? The big rock.
Yes. Actually, a journey. It was a journey.
Okay.
Where I went to this landscape with these red rocks, and I was like, where am I? And I thought maybe it was Sedona, but then I looked afterwards. I was like, oh no, that's
Australia.
Yeah. But yeah, that's that. And it was a place to like rest and replenish.
Well, I was just trying to recall the episode of that Gaia show, Initiation, where he specifically addresses that rock and how it was. Might need to cut this out because I might butcher it, but I think the rock was the serpent race and the ice record keepers that were here originally for Lemuria. I can't remember. Anyway, they put all the information from the cosmos into that rock or something like that. And you could communicate with all different kinds of portals or something. Again, totally butchering this, but it was something very mystical like that and tied to Lemuria in some way, because that was where the Lemurian people ended up helping keep that information or something. Like I said, might need to cut that out, but it was the general idea that might be connected to you is what I'm saying.
Fascinating. Ooh, I'm just pulling up my notes from the trip to there. Crone. Oh, she was a crone. I was being guided by a witch crone.
That's powerful.
Yeah. She took me to the big red canyon, beautiful, all stone and earth, red, yellow, brown tones. We looked out across it. I thought, do I have to jump in as a lesson? But then she zoomed me across on her broom into a cave filled with treasures.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, into the darkness, and there are treasures.
Wow. That's really powerful, man. God.
And then at one point there were a lot of crystals in it, and I lay down and just imagined them like doing work on me and stuff. Oh, cool. Interesting.
That is very fascinating.
I want to go back there. I should just do more journeys in general. They're so fun.
Do you just do that in meditation or do you have like a...
Yeah, sometimes I use the drumming tracks are really helpful. I like it when they're guided too. I do like a bit of guiding. There's also that Gamadrone track that's like, I think I've sent it to you. It's like 7 minutes long.
I think I have it in my email. Yeah.
Yeah. And that one's kind of, I don't know. It's short, but it's like extra
powerful,
extra weird. Like that one will take you on like really bizarre places and stuff.
Nice.
But
what a fun magic world we have access to. Did not always think that. Speaking of great awakenings, I just flashed back to Dark Night of the Soul. Never mind.
So maybe it's time to talk about our respective awakenings.
Yeah, we'll sprinkle in a little bit, and then if it gets a little, we'll start asking random questions.
When we first recorded it, it was like maybe episode 3 or something, and then after that, we had the episode where I was talking about us all being dead, and then it was like it just really felt relevant because there was a lot of death stuff in our awakening
for sure
trips.
It actually, and I'm kind of glad we're redoing this because I wanted to tie in more of some of the signs I'd seen along the way of like this actually being the real world where magic and all the stuff exists, but it was just in my childhood and I'd suppressed it a little bit. It was like it's weird because I've always felt like I've been watched. I never knew who it was. And sometimes in my head, I would get a picture of my dad who died when I was 4, or like a picture of my great grandmother who died when I was, I guess, 11 or 12 or something. So like I had these clearly ties with ancestors, even at that age, but I didn't know what that was. And I was like, why the hell am I seeing are they watching me? Like, but I didn't believe in spirits really at that point either. Cause I just didn't. So I didn't know if they were watching me or if it was just in general being watched. And now I know, my higher self and all the guides and all the everything, but I just couldn't fucking figure it out. And every time I would dream or even like imagine, like have a daydream or an actual night dream, but it would always be in third person. I would never have anything first person, like receiving something or could see my hands, or, as I was looking down at them, it was always third person. And life to me looked like a theater, like a live theater stage. And I couldn't figure out where that came from. I'm realizing now that this is actually so much tied in with how I see life right now. And I knew it even as a little kid, but I just had those memories as we were sort of integrating our stories of the Great Awakening, and how I was like, oh, I forgot I had that in me. And I wanted to mention that because it felt really nice.
Yeah.
Validation.
In your childhood, your family wasn't religious or spiritual, or were they?
We went to church on Sundays, but we belonged to a Quaker church.
Whoa.
And I know there's a couple different branches of Quaker. We call ours the cool Quakers, where it's basically mostly silence in the service, where like there'll be a little bit of a sermon if it's actually led by a pastor. Some meetings are completely silent, but anyway, ours would have a little bit of a sermon and then a lot of music, and then just like 30 minutes of silence where you would just pray to yourself or talk to spirit or whatever. So it was really cool. Yeah. So I was lucky in that. And they were super open-minded to like God being a woman. Nobody in charge said that. It was mostly like my friends who were also in the church. We would all be like, yeah, God is a woman. And we felt like really rebellious, but we could also get away with it. And then yeah, I know that I was quote unquote forced to believe in God because like that was the only perspective I had, but it didn't feel as oppressive as like most of the stories I hear from people involved in the religious community.
I'm so fascinated by this. What was your relationship to that silence, to sitting in silence?
It was so natural to me. I didn't like the first time I went to a Catholic mass, I was like, what the fuck are you guys doing? Getting up and sitting down and fucking talking the entire time? Where is the silence? So it was really a surprise to me when I would go to other services because
that can be, anything can be turned into something unpleasant when it's forced on you, but that can be such a gift to expose a kid to like a meditative, what's it like to just sit in silence? I don't know if I could have tolerated that, like without more active support and guidance as a child.
Yeah, they had
really understimulated and stuff, but that's amazing to me.
I didn't actually put this together until you're questioning me about it, and I'm saying it out loud. I'm like, oh yeah, wow, that was really cool. I love where our episodes go when you least expect, when you being the host. We have no idea. We did have there were kids sections where like downstairs they would take them out, and like if they were really little or needed to get their energy out. But I never went down with those. I think my sister did a few times. She had a little bit more energy than I did, but I just we mostly just sat there and we were fine.
And please educate me a little bit. What is the Quaker perspective on things? That your version that you were exposed.
So the way I was raised, this is incredible now that I'm like actually time traveling back into these services, because we would talk about the inner light. God is light and God is inside of you. And granted, this was still all said from like the holy, like the Trinity, the typical Christian God with a beard type shit. Like, so even though we were told God was inside of us, it still felt like a God outside of us anyway. But it was really open-minded in that way, where it was like if you were trying to send someone, like if somebody died or whatever, and you would, to be nice to the person who was left behind, you would be like, I'm holding you in the light.
Oh, wow.
I cannot believe I'm just now putting this together. This fucking huge ass breadcrumb. Anyway, yeah, Quakerism always felt to me like the most I could relate to it in the way that I'd been raised to think about it. And I could also evolve away from it without being judged. Like if I went up to a Quaker minister or whatever, I'd be like, God is a woman, or whatever. Now they'd be like, of course, like they wouldn't give a shit. I don't know where I was going with that.
Are there like rules of conduct kind of thing? Like, don't do this, do that?
No,
Interesting.
not really. Yeah, it's I would love to take you to a fully Quaker service, and fully just means like there are no leaders. You literally, everybody just sits down, silence the whole time. If you feel like getting up and sharing, like, I don't know, your thoughts, or you could literally say whatever you wanted, but only if you're moved to actually contribute. So sometimes it would just be silence for the whole whole time, or sometimes you'd have those people who are like always talking every Sunday. Of course, I have something really valuable to say during this. But it's supposed to come from the heart. It was a nice
Amazing.
intention.
I'm very ignorant about a lot of religion. Like, I didn't grow up with a lot of Christianity or Judaism stuff, and beyond that, anything else. So I'm like, I know very, very little, but that I always, from the few scraps I put together, had this idea of Quaker of being very like a very gentle kind of religion.
Yeah.
But that's really, really interesting. So also, like, you're growing up, was there like a lot of like intellectual skepticism or scientific skepticism or that kind of stuff in your life?
Yeah, my family was all educators. They were teachers, professors, principals, superintendents. They were literally all in the education system, which was really cool. I enjoyed, having that intellectual environment growing up, because they never said no to books I wanted to buy, no matter how like cheesy they probably were. They just always just let me read and explore and ask questions. That's the best side of it. We're just going to leave it there. And so, yeah, they were very much like logical, and what can you see? Faith was like there, but kind of in that way where you're like, I need to be a good person, and so I go to church and I have faith, like that kind of faith where it's like, yeah, we believe in God, but not a whole lot of spirituality. But we did ask big questions, so it's not like we didn't get into death and spirits and that kind of stuff. But if I'd asked my mom if she believed in a ghost, she'd be like, what? No.
Okay. Right. Okay. So no paranormal, no fae elementals. Yeah. Okay.
Zero. No like folk magic, nothing. Yeah. Very white German, just.
And then what about your friend group and stuff, like when you were a teenager?
It's not that I didn't have friends, but I kind of didn't really have, like, I lived in a small town, so we all knew each other and were friendly, but I didn't have people over my house a lot. It's really hard to say, because like my immediate peers I was always with at school, and so if I were to hang out with someone, it would have been them. So even if I didn't, it was like I was hanging out with them, because that was all we had in each other's life. Anyway, there were no other options to have friends. So they were all very normal. I think one time, when maybe in our teenage years, I think one time I had a couple people over and they were like, oh, do you see that? Was that a ghost? And then they were actually just trying to trick me or something, which is not in a mean way. It was just a silly way, but nothing.
Okay.
Except when I was 13 years old, I found a dragon book in a bookstore, and I made my mom buy it for me. She's like, why are we buying dragon books? I'm like, you never say no. I was like, about it. So from 13 years old on, I never stopped reading like fantasy, sci-fi, just like all that shit. And eventually in middle school, I found some boys, of course, because no girls were into it at that time, boys who were reading some of the same books that I was. And that was a really cool connection. But other than that,
it's so interesting how many people who fall into the intellectual skeptic category, or like even atheist, are like voracious fantasy sci-fi readers. It's like they still have to find a way to keep their connection to things.
Yeah. Sci-fi is so like, I've always, and no one's ever really understood what I meant by this, at least when I would ask it in classes or whatever, because I tried to write a couple papers on this and no professor of mine ever actually understood what I was saying. But I've always called sci-fi fantasy the court jester. And I don't know if you know of course you probably know, but the king would hire the court jester to say the hard truths, but he could get away with it because he was funny. And so the jester would tell literal truths that the peasants were thinking about the king, but nobody would get punished because it was in the form of comedy. So that's what sci-fi and fantasy is. It's like, those are the real worlds, and they're acceptable to read because we can discount them as fantasy, but like they're actually real, and we're only just now looking back and seeing them as breadcrumbs. That's what I mean by court jester, where they're literally telling the truth. but they can get away with it because it's easily dismissible. I need to stop talking.
No, it's interesting because you and I, we have a lot of similarities in certain ways of, I think even now in the way that we're looking back on ourselves is similar, because I think we both felt very cut off from stuff. And then looking back, you see how many breadcrumbs were in your life. We also both came to our like actual awakenings around the same age, like well into adulthood. But yeah, that's fascinating.
What about you? You had friends that were channeling.
Well, right. So it's very, I guess the best way that I can describe it is that whatever ADD is, and I think it might be multiple things, but for me, it's all energetics and frequency stuff. Yeah. In addition to cognitive mood things, it kept me in a sort of haze of, even though I have a really good memory for a lot of stuff, which often anchors me into 3D reality and keeps me obsessing over it. ADD would create this like weird haze of siloing and what's that word? Compartmentalization, where things would happen and they would be able to just like be so over the top, but then not seem like they were a part of my life. So
got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
When I was a kid, there was not no religious at all, because my mom at that period, so she was Sephardic Jewish from Turkey. So she and her parents, when she was young, immigrated from Istanbul, but they weren't very like religious Jews. So she didn't grow up with a lot of religion, but then around the time she was having me and I was young, she was like getting interested in Christianity, which is really interesting from an ancestral perspective, because my dad's WASP and my mom's Jewish. And if I go back in my past lives and my ancestors, there's so much of that
overlap.
Yeah, the conflict, the Jewish Christian, like
that's what I meant.
And like all of overlap, and all of the spin-offs and like whatever. So it's funny that she actually, like at one point she even converted to Christianity because she was exploring. She went to this Anglican church. So I did sometimes go to the church with her, like for Christmas Eve and stuff, but I never like took it. Like I was able to completely block out. And my dad really wasn't religious at all. And even when my mom did it, like she would never talk about God. It was just interesting, or anything. And that both of my parents were very nerdy academics, incredibly cerebral people living in the mental space, a lot of difficulty connecting with their bodies and with emotions. And I'm a byproduct of that. Yeah. So I didn't have any sense when I was young of there being any God at all. And I personally also didn't feel like there was a God or anything. And I don't think I spent too much time thinking about it much, even though I thought about being scared, and especially scared of death, dying a lot. But then when I was 10, I met my friend who ended up becoming one of my best friends, kind of like a sister to me. And she had actually been at my birth in utero, because her mother was my mom's midwife. And so we both just happened to attend this meeting. It was like in the middle of winter, dark night. And instead of staying home and just doing our own thing, we both decided to go to this boring, like regional health workers meeting that they were both at. And then we met in the coat room, and it was just like, bam, like soul connection. And then so we became very close very fast. And she had this whole dimension of her life. Her parents, I don't want to like get too far into her story, because what we really should do is just have her on and tell her herself. She's a fascinating person. But her parents were back to the land, hippies. Her mom was like this big pioneer of bringing midwifery back into Quebec. And so they lived way out in the country, and they had done stuff like they were like into things like alternative schooling. Like they had like tried to start alternative schooling. I mean, back to land, all that stuff you can imagine. And so part of that was they were tapped into this network in Quebec. So this would have been like the 80s and early 90s of people who did channeling. And so they would go to these meetings, and like there was a person who did the channeling, but then there was like so much more beyond that. Like my friend, starting at the age of 9, was like getting instructed in all of like these Reiki and all sorts of stuff, and like getting like messages and participating in rituals, all sorts of stuff. But there was a funny thing, because she would tell me some of it, but she also had a lot of her own baggage around it. So she kind of kept it a bit separate, and like, but also she would tell me, and I got to see her wand, which now she lent to me over the past few months. I've been working with it, this quartz crystal wand. It's really beautiful. It's infused with all these light codes and stuff. It's really cool. And I like, their house was just full of all sorts of, very esoteric stuff. And it just felt like I just had this strong feeling like that's it was interesting. And I was kind of curious, but not even like that curious, because I just had this feeling like that's not for me. Like that's her whole thing. And that's just not, like, it just felt alien, like very alien, my way of perceiving and thinking the world. I didn't have a strong visual imagination at all. Like I could hardly picture things in my head when I was a kid too. I was very cut off from that aspect of myself too, even though I loved art. It was like really hard for me to like think of anything to create kind of thing. So it's similarly, it just felt, that's not my path. And so, but then, it's like, for me, to feel so cut off from any clues, but like literally I would hear about like channelings. And she told me, I remember her telling me very young, she was like, oh, I'm not going to die. You don't have to die. And I'm not going to die. And I was like, I 100% was like, yes, that is true. I believe that. Like it really sustained me over the years too, because I got into phases where I was very worried about all of my friends' health and this and that. But I would always I was like, she's fine. She's not good. So it's not even that I was mired in my own skepticism so much, although there, I'm sure there was some of that, but like, it just felt in this weird way, like there was like a block off from it. And we even did stuff like, I remember she guided me through a past life regression once. And like, wow, there were times where I was telling her about dreams that I had, and her mom would talk about stuff, but it would like instantly like fade away into not
supposed to latch on to
it was like whoop, not which is also so interesting now I interact with people who aren't in that space themselves, and you can show that like something will happen that is so wildly synchronistic and just like what, like you clearly jumped the timeline, and then it'll be like, oh, that's so crazy, and then it's like
and it just goes. Yep.
Yeah, so that was me. I was like but what I had dreams, but again, I didn't know how to decipher them, but like dreams that spoke of past other incarnations and like really, really going far back, original source wound stuff, I think. Mm-hmm. Also, we traveled a lot, which I know you did too. And I would get really strong emotional connections to places. And I would have something I had a lot just from being a kid. I would get these waves of like sadness and nostalgia out of nowhere for a place that I was in. Just so powerful. Yeah. I had no contact. Like you're 9, I'm walking around in Turkey with my parents and just hit by like almost like deja vu, all this stuff. And you're like, what is going on? Like you're just a little kid. You're like, what is this feeling?
So true. Yeah. So true.
Yeah. Oh, and then there was a period in my adolescence where we me and that friend and my other friend, Rebecca, who also lived way out in the country and had her own really trippy stuff that I kind of would get jips and jabs of with her family, which included alien abduction and stuff like that, LSD flashbacks. Her dad is like super the man of all the stories and stuff of just like wild life happening. So anyway, there was like all in the periphery, but again, it just felt like, and this is also not something that my mind is going to turn itself to. But there was a period where the three of us were like practicing witchcraft, but I always felt like it was a ritual, and that is just not the old earth ways. I feel more like I'm tied into the galactic future than versus really ancient earth practices, because I always find ritual, I'm like, I can't do this. Like I can't, my brain doesn't like it. So it always felt like kind of swimming against the current, but we did a lot of rituals in the woods and shit. So
that's so fun. I like that.
It was fun. Yeah. So that was like my childhood teen in terms of stuff. Okay, babe.
Yeah, go for it.
Traveling. So you traveled with your parents too, and then also in adulthood, did you traveled a lot, and you moved around a lot in the States as well? Yeah.
So my mom and grandmother were educators who would present at conferences because they were specialized in gifted education. And again, really don't like that word gifted, but we're just going to use it because that's what we have. And so any place that they went to present at these conferences, they would take my sister and me. They
So
went
fun.
fucking everywhere. They went all over the United States. They went to Sweden, fucking Australia. Like they just, I don't know why they got invited to so many conferences. But anyway, so yes, we went to
Ley
all these
lines.
yeah, I mean, clearly it was part of my story. So yeah, England was one of them too. And then we would also take family trips. Like my grandmother had the spirit of a fucking nomad in her, even though she was very much stay in one place at all times kind of person. She was still like, no, we're going to go to Scotland. No, we're going to go to England. No, we're actually going to take tours of fucking Bermuda or whatever. She's like, no, that's what we're doing. I'm like, okay. So we would all just go with her because she would just want us to be a family together. And then after, yes. And then once I was done with being home, like once I was, getting my own jobs and my own apartments, that's when I did all the moving in American and French soil, I guess, but mostly American.
Yes. My maternal grandmother was also really loved to travel as well. Yeah, that's.
Do you see her a lot?
She died when I was. When did yours die?
My grandmother died like 2 weeks ago.
Oh yeah. Sorry, it was your great grandmother. Your great grandmother.
Yes.
It was the same age. I was around 11 when my grandmother died. And she was my only grandparent that I knew because I had 2 grandparents that died long before I was born, and then one that died when I was like 1 year old.
Man,
Yeah.
well, I'm glad you got to know her for a little while anyway, because that's special.
Yeah, it was special. And yeah, I look like, if you see a photo, there's photos of me. I went to Italy in 2018 and my hair was longer and I was wearing this dress that is 100% a dress she would have worn. And there's just a photo of me and I like really.
Whoa.
Yeah, I like
That's
smiling the same way and stuff. I was like, whoa, that's my grandmother.
So cool. I love when you can see your family in you. It's just a fun, or you and the family, it's just a really cool reminder. We're all just one soul, man.
This is a side rant, but just on the topic of travel, it's not like 100%. I'm not 100% opposed to the way that the word privilege is used right now, but one of the things that I have that I don't like about it is that I think it turns things that are human rights into the idea of something that's a luxury. And like, I think our idea of human rights is it's just awful. It's just like, what if we just like the most barely being alive, miserable existence, we'll call that a right. And then anything beyond that is like, you're on your own. And then even with human rights, we don't respect them. But I think travel is like a human right, along with a million other things.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I have always thought every time I travel somewhere, I'm like, this is what it means to be a good and whole global citizen, is if you are a stranger in a strange land, you learn real fucking fast how to have empathy for a lot of other people who might come to your country and feel the same way you do in theirs. But if you never get out of your country, you don't know how that feels. And so you miss that human connection of, I'm seeing literally where another person is coming from. Thank you very much.
Anything that is shunned or criminalized holds so much energetic power. So being able to move freely across the earth holds so much energetic power and like shift energies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, travel is just awesome because you can see so many beautiful places on this earth. It's like, there's so much.
I know, like we turn our existence into just drudgery.
Yeah.
And then we're like, get angry at anyone who like escapes that drudgery. And we're like, instead of being like, we should all be traveling. It's like, no, if only some people can travel, then no one should travel.
Basically. Ridiculous.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So you had that cool ley line traveling thing.
Yeah.
And then your Dark Night of the Soul.
Good.
Started
2016.
2016. Oh yeah, right. We were really aligned.
It was, I didn't realize it was literally until earlier this year. So I was in a Dark Night of the Soul, like we both were, for quite a bit of time before we realized what that was in context. So anyone who survives that is really, that's a tough one. Okay. So 2016, it started with, I felt something break inside of me in a way that felt like a genuine no fucks given vibe. Like I would say I give no fucks a lot of times, but that was mostly to remind myself that I didn't need to. I still gave fucks. But this one felt very much just, I can watch someone float away on their own island of pain and it doesn't feel bad to me. And that was a really foreign very foreign concept because I was used to carrying the pain. I was like, oh, if I carry the pain for people, it'll make it better for them. If I carried it energetically and felt it in my body. Ugh. So 2016 was the first time I like let go of that somehow. Well, I was triggered too, obviously. Everyone's triggered at some point, and that just broke in a good way. It was like, wow, this feels I was detached enough from a lot of things in a way that almost felt healthier at the time, where I was not carrying other people's pain because I couldn't even carry mine. Apparently it was just gone. Like there was nothing inside of me. So that was really good. It was a really great place to be as far as like feeling what it felt like energetically, to know my own space and to not carry someone else's crap. So that was nice. But again, when we talk about these dark nights, most of mine were spent not being attached to being alive, like actively looking at places I could go in the woods to just be an animal's meal, like I did not want to be found. I was just like, the thought of existing was just like, I need to just not exist. I don't know how to make that happen, but I need to just not exist. And it didn't ever feel very dark to me. It was just mostly like unattached to being alive. It didn't feel light or dark. It just was. It got me to a place of where I had always been, as you grow up, you revisit, old thoughts or whatever. And we'd all been programmed with thoughts about people who die by suicide, whether you think it's romantic in a tortured artist way, or like it's, to be vilified because you're a coward, whatever. I had been revisiting what I thought about suicide anyway in recent years, mostly because I was having my own struggles with it. So I just saw people who died by suicide as they got tired and they took the power into their own hands and just checked out of life and logged into a new game. I didn't have there was no judgment in me left about dying by suicide. So I feel like that's a thing that is going to play into my life later, where I am supposed to be maybe talking about this more or like helping other people through this. I don't really know. But anyway, that's why it felt important to say that. Say that, where it just feels, suicide does not scare me. It just does not. Anyway, so I made it through all of that. Obviously, every year just felt like the last year. I was like, I don't know, I can't see myself anywhere past this one day. And so the years kept going by where I would just like go into work and be like, I don't know how I can keep doing this, but I'm numb. So whatever. And then in it was in the middle of July. So I think it was like the 17th, which is why that number just popped in my head. But anyway, July of 2020, I came across some stupid Twitter thread about somebody making jokes about astrology or something. And I was randomly going in the comments to be like, oh, maybe somebody lists a cool psychic that I could actually follow because it might be fun. Literal, just out of the blue thought, no reason for this other than just a random, quote unquote random. And then in the comments, someone had mentioned Jessa Reed, and I was like, well, let's just check it out. And then she had her little Twitter bio was like, or host of Soberish. And I was like, okay, even I'm not really struggling with addiction, but like Soberish feels like how I operate basically every day. So this sounds funny. Let me check it out. And then the first episode was about aliens. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Someone calls their spirit guides aliens because it's just more funny. Like that was my sense of humor. And so I was like, fuck it, we're going to listen to all this shit. And then I got involved with the Patreon and meeting people in the community. And that's kind of side note of how we met anyway, just offshoots of the Soberish community.
I want to go back to your Dark Night of the Soul for a little super hot moment, because now again, just hearing it's so interesting because it's like the opposite of my Dark Night of the Soul. My Dark Night of the Soul was like going so hard into like codependent suffering that it was just agonizing. But I think it's really interesting because while you were talking about that, I was like, even though it's a Dark Night of the Soul, it also just sounds like a major integration period that you are in of like in a human body, in a human avatar, integrating the non-being and being in the same time. Nothingness and everythingness are the same thing. Yeah. But we perceive them as separate, and it causes, at least for me, so much angst and dread. And I just see you during that period of having actual no fucks left to give, in that non-attachment of like really going into that energy of nothingness and emptiness and integrating that onto the planet, which is like super important. super like I think that's one of the ways that I think for me at least we misunderstand. I'm not calling you by any means a sociopath or a psychopath, but it just made me think of like sociopaths and psychopaths. I think they are also holding that energy in them, and it's like a very, very dense experience as well. And they're like also holding really important stuff, but getting to that place of just being so exactly unattached to the idea of staying in this body on earth. I just think that's so, you were doing really, really powerful integration work.
That is kind of blowing me away. I never actually thought of it like that. And I think you might be right. Oh,
yeah. And then it surprised me that you're like coming out of that integration and feeling physical symptoms too. Anyway, it's fascinating. Yeah, because my dark night of the soul, the other aspect of my upbringing that was very, very present was my mom was extremely hyper focused on ethics and the human condition, thought about it nonstop from the time I was born, talked to me about it nonstop. She never talked to me like a kid. She just would expound philosophically constantly, and had so much, I would say, like what Jessa would call arsenal energy, of that energy of like tearing things down, so much arsenal energy and so much anger. And so I grew up also carrying in with my own soul that stuff too, but it was just like really a strong guiding force of my life was you must be an ethical person, and like you must be preoccupied at all times with the harm that you might be doing or that you are already doing. And so when I was a teen, I started getting into activism. I went into women's studies and gender studies. And then I worked for like a nonprofit that was very militant, and then worked for another nonprofit, and also got into more activism and stuff. So it was always like that, but it was I didn't have a good relationship to it.
Feels
it wasn't
heavy when you talk about it.
It was very heavy. And also I had so much like self-judgment, and then of course judgment of like others and the harm that people were doing, and then the harm that humans were doing as a species. It was just consumed. So I'd been working at this nonprofit. And then I had this idea in 2016 in the summer. I was like, oh, I'm going to quit and I'm going to work on this novel that I have brewing in me. And I think it's going to be really psychedelic. I think it might be really trippy and all this stuff. And what happened was I quit. I immediately had all this time alone to myself. And I was really burnt out too from the work and like body things and stuff that I was ignoring in myself. Yeah. So immediately kind of started spiraling a bit. And then when the election happened, it caused like a psychic break in me, because now what I see, at the time I didn't know what was happening. I was just like, oh, fuck, we're fucked, But now I see like what I was doing was like tapping into this timeline jump that we've done, and like all these potential cataclysmic timelines. I was like, because I spend so much time I feel my different selves and my different timelines and future stuff. I feel it very much in my body, though I never knew that. So I was just like, oh, fuck. And I just went into absorbing all of the fear and the dread that was happening collectively. And I was just, the opposite of no fucks to give. I was like, I will take all of the fucks. And I just didn't want to be alive. I felt like I was dead. I felt like I was dead. Yes. I felt like I was dead. Things didn't stop seeming real. Like I couldn't watch. I was like, nothing is. And I was very scared of spreading fear and panic. So I wasn't telling anybody. So I couldn't talk to people normally. Like I got my partner to make suicide pacts. And I was just like, he would come home and I would just be like crying, and we'd have to go for a walk, and he'd have to reassure me that if it got really bad, we'd go kill ourselves. And just spent so much time in that energy, and then started having a lot of things happening. People who I was very close to were starting to have crises in their life. And it just became I was just like completely overwhelmed and stopped being able to really function. And just like that level of like overwhelm and depression and anxiety. Yeah. And so, but I just feel like, I think I was also doing something.
Yeah, you totally were.
It was definitely like me having zero boundaries with anything. Like that was my experience that I had to go through. It's like just like a lifetime of not having any boundaries or not feeling safe to have boundaries. And then it was like a tidal wave of just like all the worst energy washing over me constantly and stuff.
I'm sorry, dude. That really That was really funny, but it really sucks. That's the work that we did unconsciously. This is really exciting to explore because you were anchoring some shit too. Raw nervous system there.
Oh God. The job I did on my nervous, which was already so fried. And then it's good to remind myself sometimes what I'm coming out of like 3 solid years of like just constant terror and dread. It's like, oh yeah, it might take a while for my nervous system to like really
maybe a minute
recalibrate from that. And then I had, I was going to say one thing, which was the humanity, the like total self-judgment of humanity, which was, obviously if you listen to the other episode where I was talking about my like feeling angry towards Mother Earth, like it's because I spent so much time in that state of being like, well, I guess, we really brought this on ourselves, and like, what a, just awful way to feel.
Not really. It's valid. I mean, just objectively valid coming from me for what it's worth.
But then 2019 I got really my friend's mother got diagnosed with cancer, and I was like, why is this sending me into total panic 24/7? But it wasn't that. It was because I felt the awakening coming and I knew it was going to happen. And so I was like, what is going on? And my body started freaking out, and like I was having like period after period, and like sciatica, and I was just in the bath all the time, and I was already having all these digestive issues, and like during that period, the dark night of soul, my mouth was like full of canker sores.
Whoa.
It was really hard. Like I stopped being able to eat. Like I had to eat this really restricted diet, and everything. It was just like everything's just too much. It's too much. So then the summer of 2019 was just, that's what did it for me, was in rapid succession, event after event, starting with an extremely just shattering family disclosure that was like completely rocked my whole idea of what my childhood was, and all of these things just like totally threw me into like grief and daily panic attacks. And then from then on, every little stray worried thought that I had would instantly materialize, including being in a crowded space. And I was like, oh, this would be a bad place for a shooting. Cut to, I'm watching a sniper run across the roof, and then there was a little shooting, and then there was like a stampede that my partner and I got caught in. And then like trip after trip to the emergency room at different hospitals with like crisis after crisis that culminated in my mom getting pneumonia, which was very much like this was September 2019, so very much like a foreshadowing, and with the lungs, which is a grief stuff. So she got pneumonia, and then but immediately like it got really bad, and then she developed blood clots in the hospital, and she was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and it looked like really very touch and go. And during that time, it was like 2 days into, I was just deciding that I had to go to Montreal to be with my mom. And I had listened to Duncan Trussell's podcast a few times, or many times, and enjoyed it, but I hadn't listened to it for a while. And then I just saw the title of the episode, and it was Synchronicity with Noah. And it was like, whoop. And then I listened to it. And then within literally 2 days of that, it was the episode where he interviewed Jessa. So they came to me at the same time. And it just was like, I've said this before, but it didn't feel like my first go around. I feel like I've done this a few times and it just like hit, like, I was like, oh yeah. And then Noah was like very soothing, but then Jessa, I was like, oh my God, this is literally what my childhood friend, like the exact same stuff that she was telling me with channelings and like stuff. So it was just, it was the perfect confluence of things to like override. And I already had the experience of being like, I think every single thing I think is happening, but it was like only bad things, I'd be like, hope something, like I was like, oh shit, like everybody's dropping like flies and having crises, and the only two people I can rely on anymore are Mike and my mom. And then it was like, oh, Mike fainted and is in the hospital, and then no one can say because he like tore something in his leg, and it was like, oh, your mom's in the So I already had that being like, what is going on? It was like the most surreal summer of my life, where I was just like, this is what the fuck is happening. And then it was like, okay, you're ready for the flip side of that.
Oh my God.
It hit hard with you too, right?
Yeah.
Did it like immediately like a gong into you, or not so much?
I think for me, it was maybe a couple of I'm trying to feel back on that, because I remember listening to that first episode of Soberish. It wasn't the first, it was like the second season where she actually talks about aliens. And it was the way she was talking about it. You know what? I think I felt the resonance from like her speaking from her heart space, which I hadn't heard anyone do in so long, because everything felt fake to me and so ashy and not real or whatever. And there was all of a sudden, I just felt this brightness in my body. And I was like, okay, wait, there's something here. But it didn't feel like a gong necessarily. It more felt like the resonance sort of like matched up with my frequency and was like, all right, time to look in here. Open that door.
Yeah, for me, it was just like, I was like, oh, because I came to Noah first. So it was like, it wasn't like you have guides, they're alien. It was like, you are God, your imagination is everything, you create so it was like the big
yeah.
And I don't know, for whatever reason, like I needed that one first. It's really interesting too, because he came to me first, and that was really important too, was this male voice saying, you're fine just the way you are. You could be even a piece of shit and you're still fine. You're still perfect and you're still God. And it was like, so like, I so needed that, like that part of my own masculinity had been so shat on by me my whole life, that it was like very, very important. And then Jessa was like a really good, as you say, so raw and like real and willing to go into the dark places, and very also, you could see her care for humanity. Like she had that arsenal energy that was a really important for me to tap into in spirituality at the time, but then also having Noah there saying, like, in his own way, very like feminine energy of like, it's okay, everything's okay, and it's all good, was just like, those two voices were very, very crucial. And I immediately went and told all of my, even though they're like, don't evangelize, I was like, no, I'm supposed to. There are a few people in my life I'm supposed to at least just offer to send these podcasts to. It was so, I've talked about this, but it's like, it felt like I was having, like I had a hand on my back just shoving me to be like, so there were like 6 people where I was like, okay, I think you might want to listen to it. Yeah. And then I stopped, and then I was like, okay.
I only sent Jess's episodes to one of my friends. I didn't really have anyone else to, and even she was like, okay, like she gets it and believes in it, but like doesn't have it for herself. So she's kind of like you with your friend, where it's like for other people, but not for me. And I'm like, dude, you can channel, but whatever. Anyway, so I have one friend that I can kind of talk to that's not actually in this crazy community. But yeah, she never really got into it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the people that I sent them to, they all had their own thing, and it was like to varying degrees that it was like that point in time, that was the thing. Got to get it out. There was so much urgency in that.
It felt
in
urgent.
2019 and early 2000s, there was so much like pressure and urgency and like fastness. It was like, quick, we're doing this now. And then it was like before the extremely excruciatingly slow part's supposed to kick in. But what was I going to say about Jessa? Everyone was also in a big dark night. All of my friends were in their own respective really intense dark nights of the soul too, and like super intense stuff happening in their lives as well. So yeah, as opposed to now where everything's so chill.
Seriously.
But yeah, it's like wild to think back on that time, and no wonder I got such a wave of like colossal fear in April, because it was like, oh, it's gonna get in.
I know, right? Oh my God.
Yeah. What was your first activation that you felt in yourself of, oh, I'm experiencing this, not just hearing about it, but experiencing it? I
had tried some automatic writing I don't know. Somebody said to
Cool.
try it. I don't know. I just had it in my head. It's like, all right, we'll try this. It felt really powerful to me. I think I ended up crying actually, because it was like, it felt so beautiful. I haven't thought about that actually in a minute. So that was a weird memory. But shortly after that, I actually got visited in my mind's eye by my guide, the one that showed up as the gay British artist living in a loft. And then I finally was like, oh, I can talk to people that are not people that are like me. What is going on? But it was really cool. It just felt like a friend in my head. And I realized that voice had already always been there. And so it was comfortable already. And I was just now seeing like a persona in my imagination, which is where all the communication happens anyway. And that was really cool. The biggest thing after that was learning how to read the Akashic records. I was like, holy shit, I am home. What the fuck? What? And the first few times I tried to open it, my palms were all sweaty. I was like, am I good enough to get in here? And I would just be like nervous and anxious and like.
And that also ties into something you've said before, which is you always felt like we should be able to just download any kind of anything we needed to know just into our heads, like or minds or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, I like that. So
that's
you always
exactly.
that kind of
That's exactly it. It was like, I knew like libraries always fascinated me and archives always fascinated me. And I was like, that's almost right. I was like, no, but there's a place for every information. And I would do this motion with my little kid hands. I'd be like, I can pull it down. I know it's right there. That was a memory that I had forgotten about too. Yeah.
So cool.
And I also had this sense that I would remember everything once I died. I didn't think of it as God. Like I was already angry and like I was like, God does not exist. Nothing exists, whatever. But I still think that when I die, I'm going to be like absorbed into a consciousness. I cannot believe I had these thoughts and I'm just now remembering them. I would be absorbed into a consciousness where I would finally have all the answers because I was always chasing them, you know? I was like, once I die, I'm going to remember everything. It's going to be amazing.
You knew.
I cannot believe these memories are surfing now that we're talking about these dark nights of the soul that they were awful, but also, man, some of the fun memories are really cool to recall right now.
Yeah. Side note, I just want to say for the record, there's something I didn't mention that happened in my mid-20s where I actually started to dip my toes into things like lucid dreaming, astral travel. I had my boyfriend at the time was really interested in it. And then our apartment burned down and it like cut that off. It was like a really abrupt, like, nope.
Whoa.
And there's a whole story about that I'm going to save for another episode because it's too long to get into right now. But the apartment burning down is very symbolic of some stuff. And I do want to talk about it. But yeah, there was a point in my mid-20s where I like put my little paw in the water and then it was like, not now. And I was told actually with AOE, it was her that gave me this real big gift, which was saying like, because I was feeling like, what the fuck, why did it take me so long? And she said, no, you were being intentionally kept away from this stuff until there were certain things you wanted to go through, not having this access to this knowledge and stuff.
Yeah,
so
clearly those blocks are there for us. And we're like, oh, damn it.
Yeah. For me, it started right away as soon as I started listening to the podcast. I mean, it was such a wild time in my life where so much had happened. I'd been to so many hospitals and then my mom. So I was like very hyper focused on her and in a kind of a caretaking mode. I was like running back and forth between visiting her at the hospital and then just taking care of her apartment, which had gone into real disrepair when she was sick. And just, yeah, I mean, we were worried that she was going to die. So I was just like focused on that all the time. But listening to like 8 synchronicity episodes, just like, just being like, holy shit. And immediately, like, I remember I came back for the weekend for a little break and took a walk with Mike and all the t-shirts were speaking to me. It was like, everybody was wearing, like, nobody wears in where I live. They don't wear a lot of clothing with words on them. You just don't see it a lot, like aside from just like Adidas or something, like brand names, but like actual slogans, it's not. So it was really standing out where it was like 10 people and it was like, she did it her way. And like, they were just like great. Like the messages were like, you got this. And like, it's going to be okay. Like what?
On point.
So that was one thing. And then the other things, which I didn't realize, it was, and immediately there were just like synchronicities are very much my jam. So it was like, that was a lot of that. But then the other two things I didn't really connect the dots until afterwards. But one was I just listening to these podcasts and I was like, oh my God. I'm like, and my mom and I were having a lot of deep conversations in the hospital too, just kind of a lot of emotional stuff. And then I one day I was just like, Mom, I don't think anyone's ever told you that they love you unconditionally before. And I just want to tell you that, like, I love you unconditionally. And like, she had not improved. Like, even though she was past the crisis point with the blood clot, she still wasn't being able to get up. And then like within days, she was just like up and like left the hospital. And it was like the exact day I had to go back. I was like, I have to go home. I can't keep staying with you. And it was like, you're going to have to leave the hospital that day. And she did. And she was so weak. And I was like, just like, here I am leaving you alone in your apartment. And then she just like took a bath and came out of the bath and felt like way better. And just like from then on, it was like, she was good. So afterwards I was like, oh shit, that was like, we did a healing together, you know, like we used the power of love to like really restore. And then the other thing was jumping a collective timeline where I was walking the exact same route every day. And from one day to the next, there were suddenly posters up everywhere about this march that was going to happen in 2 days. And it was like the climate march. It was going to be the climate. And then what's her name? Greta Thunberg was going to be speaking at it. And it turned out to be like, there were like 500,000 people in Montreal, which is huge, showed up. And it hadn't been like, it was just like a complete, I was like, those posters were not up. There was like nothing. And then we just hopped onto the timeline where that was happening, which at the time, again, I was just like, this is really weird. And then later I was like, oh yeah, that was like a collective timeline jump, which I think is also a big part of my personal path. Like, I think it was showing me things that were going to be important to the path.
I think we work on this together somehow, weaving shit. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, I'll take more insight on that anytime. I have no idea how it works.
Well, it's not we
don't really do much. It's just our souls.
Yeah. It just happens. It's always that case where you're so focused on something else. Like I was like, I couldn't have been after, oh, well, that's interesting. You just, after spending 3 years with my eyes glued to every bad news, like I made myself go down. Like if there was something upsetting, I would make myself read it. If there was something horrifying and traumatizing, I would go and like read it and then just like, you know, it was a lot of like staring at, So after 3 years of that, but like constantly having my attention pointed on the awfulness, I was focused on something else, with all of myself being focused on my mom, and also bringing in that energy of like optimism and hope and possibility from the podcast, but not actively actually thinking about the broader collective.
Yeah.
Is what did it.
Yep. That makes sense.
I think some people do it more intentionally. And there are all sorts of ways that we jump collective timelines, and everybody's bringing different pieces of the puzzle. And some people do it very organically without a lot of effort. I think because I enjoy being aware of things so much, that's not my way to do things like really. Like, for example, my friend Rebecca, I'm like, you're always doing manifesting stuff in like the most gentle, organic, effortless way. It's just like naturally part of her being. And like, I'm like, that's
your ways.
But then you have your own way. We all have our own ways that we enjoy.
Yeah, that's true.
And so in your awakening, Jessa was a very big influence, like guide. Any other?
I had readings with a couple of people. I had one with Lacey that like, that was a doozy. And anyway, just in a good way. Sorry. I think I had an Akashic Records reading. Anyway, I just had a couple of different like energetic readings, and I was so nervous at first and just like was scared to talk to people on the phone. Now it's natural. I'm like, I was scared to do this. What? And every little piece of information just unlocked a thing. And I would go down new rabbit holes or find new TV shows or see old TV shows in a different way. I just was thinking about things in a whole new way that brought me more information, and some of the, like I said, some of the older information, like movies and books and shit like that I'd read as a kid, they would come back and I'd be like, oh yeah, there we go. That gave some seeds and breadcrumbs along the way. So I was just doing a whole lot of revisiting and remembering and unlocking, and it all kind of just came together pretty quickly. Yeah.
I love how I really see it like, you know, again, there's like that almost urgency to go around and get a lot of readings and stuff in the beginning. And I think sometimes people can like view that as like you're taking in too much, like you shouldn't go outward so much. But I think we're like these connector activator points for each other, and we have to like pass through each other's portals. So
yep.
I think that's the reason that we feel that I got to get a million readings and a million healings and stuff, because it's like, I got to connect with this person and that they're going to activate something in me and stuff. And
exactly,
it's a really fun part of it. The part where we run around and all like test out each other's
it's so fun
services is very fun.
I don't think that's ever going to get old, because we're all just going to keep growing and getting new skills and deeper in our talents and just confidence. I don't know. This feels like a really cool, never ending ride at this point right now. All right. Before we go, I wanted Canadian KK to share their dream about the pandemic before the pandemic happened.
Yes, because it ties in with what we've been talking about today. Yeah. So it was like early-ish December 2019. I had a dream where a friend of ours this person was very sick and in the hospital, and it was this really old rundown hospital, super overcrowded. And I was like walking down the halls, looking into these dark rooms that were just like people like lying on pallets on the floor, like just so many people everywhere. And I was looking down at this woman she was lying in the dark, and her parents were like staring up, looking really scared. And her sister was by her body too. And she had crystals around her head and like underneath, which also for me, when it was like coronavirus, I was like, oh, the crown, you know. But yeah, at the time I was just like, well, this is a weird dream. And so I was in the dream with my partner, Mike, and I was trying to get him to come out of that part of the hospital with me. And I was like arguing with him, and I was like, because it's like, it was more his friend than mine. And I was like, look, why don't you just come and live with me instead of like staying in this like horrible, depressing place where, you know, if she's going to die, she's going to die. We can't do anything about it. You just have to like come and like actually start living with me. And he was like having a really hard time letting go. And then I went away to another part of the hospital, which was like huge, brand new, really nice looking, with these like massive windows. And I was staring out the window, and I was on the phone with Mike, who was still in the old part of the hospital. And I was talking to him about, there's like another aspect of the dream that I won't get into, but I was talking to him about that. And then as I was staring out of the window, it looked like an airport that I was looking at. And then we were also very high up in the sky. And these flock of bald eagles flew by, and I was like,
forgot
whoa.
about that.
And then these winged lions flew by with angels that fell off of their backs to the ground. So it was just like these angels like falling off, which I've never had religious iconography in a dream ever. And they look like those drawings of angels where they have the halo over there and the wings, like they were just falling off the back. And then I was like, I was like, I gasped into the phone, and I was like, it's the apocalypse, aka the Great Awakening. Yeah.
On
so
the nose.
When I say it took me a while to twig, like it took, like we were like, I don't even know, but we were like several weeks in where I was like, wait, my dream, which I had like, I took that dream in January of that year I was doing like I started this dream mentorship, which I didn't finish, but I took it to the guy and like talked to him about it. Like I was really, It's not like I'd forgotten the dream. Like it was really, but then I was like, oh my God.
And there we have the episode title, aka the Great Awakening.
Yeah. This is people have said this to me so many times. They're like, you're so on the nose with like my synchronicities, my messages, they're always very on the nose. It's always like hitting me over the head with a very literal, like, no, don't. I think when I talked about having done this before, I must have gotten so caught up in, oh, but you could interpret it this way or that way, like the fun of like the riddles and like getting lost in like, well, there's no one interpretation of things. So I probably just like spiraled out a bunch of times into like completely stalling out in like, it could be anything land. So this time they're like, no. It could be anything.
But it's this. I love all the on the nose stuff, man. It is my favorite. It is my literal favorite because I need more of that too. And I'm calling in more of that for myself. It's too fucking funny. It just makes life so much better. Oh my God. Okay. Happy awakening, everybody. It's the motherfucking best. Oh, love you guys. Bye.